Welcome to Dialogue Houston, and to have you here is a wonderful pleasure to come into your homes every week. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your calls, emails, and text messages concerning last week's show and your wonderful, thoughtful suggestions and ideas for upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston for guests and topics to be covered. You can catch us now on Dialogue Houston here on HCCTV, Channel 19 and Comcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m. and on Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As we come to the end of this calendar year, we'll be talking with you in the weeks to come about our wonderful schedule for the new year and commencing in January 2014 as we look at Houston and all of its aspects as we move from the fourth to the third largest international city in America, and what does that really mean, and how do we as Houstonians live, work, thrive, and grow and develop together in this wonderful city known as Houston. This week's show is to help us begin that process by looking at different aspects of Houston. Our good friend at Rice University, Dr. Stephen Kleinberg, we've had on many, many times, and he gives us a great slice, a great snapshot with his annual Houston area survey of what Houstonians think and feel about a myriad of issues going forward. And we know that when he comes and gives his annual report on the show, which he does faithfully every year, it is always interesting to look at the slices of the envelope that has changed over the years. And it covers, as you know, many issues from education to healthcare to housing to homelessness to hunger to all those things. But we have another great resource at Rice University, and that is the Shell Center for Sustainability, that looks at the city in a different way. It actually has taken a great study and divided the city in the city council member districts. To familiarize yourself, that goes from A to J. We just added K and J this past year based upon the 2010 census, which meant we had to expand city council to include 2 new district councils. So when you look at Houston from the perspective, as the Shell Center for Sustainability has done, you get a different look at the city. What you find in relationship to Dr. Kleinberg's study is that really when you talk about Houston, you have to talk about the tale of 2 cities, because there really is a great divide and a great differences depending on what side of town, what zip code one lives in, and et cetera. To help us understand this and to work through this wonderful study with us is none other than Dr. Lester King, who is the postdoc at the Houston Sustainability Center, but is also the director of the Indicators Report and is the principal researcher on this project. And we're just so happy and great to have Dr. King join us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Larry.
How are you?
I'm great. Thank God.
This is an important body of work, a very important piece to the layer of the onion known as Houston. Tell us about this.
Well, we wanted to produce something that Houstonians, both citizens, elected officials, and as well as city staffers could use to help to understand performance in the city, development performance, to be more exact, in the city.
And what it ended up showing, as I said in the opening, is that it really is an interesting slice of the onion looking at Houston when you do it by council district, because it gives you a great difference in the variety.
Right. A lot of us go to the polls. We just came back from the polls.
Right. And going back to the polls again, runoffs December 14th.
That's right. I said a lot, and
Right.
really the voting participation in Houston is not very strong. You know,
Right.
we're actually just getting into double digits if you only count the folks who are registered. But if you count the ones who are eligible, meaning over 18,
Right.
we're down in single-digit participation.
Yeah.
And in fact, for the Houston races, we had under 200,000 people in the city participating in voting this year. So please get out to vote.
But isn't it?
That's one of the fundamental things we should do.
It is very fundamental. It is part of democracy. You can't have a voice in democracy if you don't vote and be involved in the process. But isn't it sad that you only have 200,000 people in the city with 2 million people that decides the destiny and the future of this city?
So it brings questions to the fore of really representation. Right? Are the elected officials in office really representative of Houston, or are they more representative of the people who actually voted? And so again, it also introduces the idea, or really it allows me to talk about why we produce a study at the council district level. And certainly it was a matter of bringing to bear this idea that we do go to the polls, elect these officials to represent us.
Right.
The city is broken up, as you mentioned, into 11 different districts. and each district has approximately 200,000 people within those boundaries. And what does that mean? We have a $4 billion budget at the city level, and every city council meeting is a matter of deciding which development projects actually get funded. And so those development projects are actually identified by district. And so the capital improvement plan is the avenue through which you can get, any citizen in Houston or organization can get their kind of needs and wants actually done, actually planned, actually built through the avenue of council districts. So it's also important to report back to these, to us, the citizens here, how development is performing over time.
Right. We might mention, since you mentioned the 11 council districts, that we're only talking about the district council districts A through to J, which gives you the 11. There are 5 at-large council members and the mayor, which makes up the complete city council around the table.
That's right.
But I just want to make sure that we're just focusing on the alphabet letters A through J.
That's correct.
But to your point about, but let's go back to voting for a moment. That when you cut through the data, when you look at who actually voted district by district, the numbers of voters in each district sometimes that determines that district race is such a small turnout. I mean, it's just a small subset.
That's right. That's right. In fact, the range was from 4% through 13% for the better performing district. And so you get districts like District F, for instance, performing at more like 3%, and then a District C and a District G performing more in the double digits with 13%. And so, yes, I mean, certainly a lot of folks kind of link income to as the biggest determinant of how people will turn out at the polls.
Right.
But I think there's a little bit more. There's a little bit more involved in terms of, if the rates are so low, then you can't just use income to predict who's going to turn out. Right. So perhaps we should have more effort being placed into coming up with maybe new ways in which we can encourage people to come to the polls.
There's an old saying that when people come out to vote, that many people, it's easier to turn someone out to vote against something than for something. If one feels they have something to lose, that is an easier vote to get out than motivating someone to come out for something they think they may have to gain. Right. And I think you see that in most elections.
And which is unfortunate, right?
It is very unfortunate.
So this is the kind of these are the scenarios the kind of world we live in, the kind of state of things today. And so our report helps to produce information so that we don't just rely on what's going on that's bad, right? Our report presents several different themes. We have data on housing, affordability. We have data on transportation, on transit. We have data on food deserts as hot button issues, things that people care about. We have data on flooding, the flooding situation in the city. And we have data as well on education and unemployment and income. So there are many, many things that Houstonians should care about. And so we produce 30 odd different indicators that you should definitely pay attention to in the city.
And after the break, we're going to go through each one of the districts. But before the break, I want to set up the larger kind of context in this first segment. Because I think it's important that people get the feel that it is now in this demographic change and economic development change of this city. There is the rich and the poor. There is the super rich. There's the super poor. There's a shrinking middle class. There's a proliferation of gated communities. You have all of that going on at the same time. And so when you talk about Houston and the city of Houston and the citizens of Houston, you really, and that's why the report is so important, you have to really break it down as to whom and what you're really talking about. And it's not an equal discussion. There is a question of equity and equality from district to districts. And it's also, I think, the issue of, in the changing demographics, when you just talk about education alone for a moment, the new unempowered majority, the minorities or the persons of color are now the majority in our district, in our city demographically, again, through Kleinberg's study. But we have to tell, in the case of kids and young people who get excited about being the new majority, got to put a word in front of you, you're the new unempowered majority. And education, obviously, is the key to that empowerment, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And the other phenomenon, which I think is beginning to show the differences in this city, where that tale of two cities come in the second era of the resegregation of the schools. Just 5 minutes from here at HCC at 3100 Main, where we're filming and taping right now, you can go a few blocks and take you to an all-black school, to an all-Hispanic school. And there's nothing wrong with that, because those of us who lived through the first era of segregation got a great education. I'll put my little colored school education. We were colored back then. Colored, Negro, Black, African American. I'll put my little color school education against anybody's education. But we're finding now, though, however, the phenomenon, the quality of education which you receive is really dependent on your zip code, which is just wrong. If we say these kids are our future workforce, our future to be able to compete nationally and globally, we have to educate them. We don't have a choice. And your data and statistics, when we go through each district, shows some of those inequities, does it not?
It does, it does. So you're right, the city is a very complicated thing that we're trying to manage here. And those we elect as well, who take preeminent positions on trying to manage our city. It's a complicated thing. And so when we talk about education, it's not a simple answer of go improve the schools.
Right.
You know, these are the types of data that we produce in these reports, are the types of considerations that also have an impact on an area that a school is located in. Because if a child has to go to school through bad neighborhoods, or if they don't have proper transportation to get to the school, you know, these are things that take away from them having an enriched experience.
And the safety issue comes into play when a culture like the city of Houston, we see on the news all the time issues with young people now in schools and drama, either on the school campus, off the school campus, and weekends at the party that we just saw in the news this weekend with social media blowing up a little individual birthday 18-year-old birthday celebration into this hundred of masses of people. But it also speaks to the other issue, not only of education as we know it, K through 12 during the day hours of school as we traditionally know it, but what happens after school with after school programs. We know, according to the Houston Police Department and the research that Councilman C.O. Bradford has done, that the proliferation of gangs in this city is just tremendous. Gangs are growing at a phenomenal rate, both in the number of gangs and the number of gang members. And so as that number grows, it has to speak to the gangs filling that vacuum of what's not happening in those predominantly 3 to 6 hours after school, because it's all about filling that vacuum and void. It gives those kids something to do, and if we as a society and by each council district don't have those programs to attract the kids after school, then the gangs are going to fill that vacuum.
That's right. And if you have areas in the city where a lot of us don't like to go to, you know, those are areas that the gangs proliferate. And what are the reasons why we wouldn't want to go to certain areas and we would want to go to others? You know, certainly there are destinational types of things that attract us, but also things like connectivity. If we don't have our neighborhoods and our areas well connected to our street network, on our street network, excuse me, if we have a lot of dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs and areas that dead-end into highways and bayous, you know, those are things that proliferate crime.
Right.
However, if we have more streets opening up, more connectivity again, you have, you know, if you want to get from east to west across the city, you don't have to jump on a highway, but roads actually take you from east to west and north to south, and that helps as well to deter some of these
Also speaks to our mass transit system, which we do not have properly, either rail or bus. You can't get to certain parts of the city in mass transit, and if you do, the transfer, I know some people who work, it's a 2-hour bus trip to get from where they live on the east end to the place they work on the west end. And that's not going to work in a city this large. No.
You talked about us maybe being 4th or 3rd largest city in the country. Well, Chicago is the 3rd largest city at this time. Chicago has 177 more miles of rail, than Houston does. We have 7.5 miles. And so for us I think we're doing a reimagining project at this time, trying to redo our bus routes and make them more efficient. Well, buses have to use the same roadways as the cars, so you're going to be at some point gridlocked in traffic. However, if we wanted to get to the same type of performance in terms of transit as the next highest, which is Chicago, we'd have to lay 177 more miles of rail. Okay, so that's our target.
Yep. And speaking of that, about not only mass transit, we'll have to take a break here in a moment. I'm always amazed when I run into young people in their little sections of their part of their town who've literally never been to other parts of the city. I was just in the East End the other day, and I ran into a group of young kids. We were talking about Houston and the various things you can do. And I mentioned the Memorial City area out off of I-10 West. Never been to Memorial City. Never been to City Center. Didn't really even know about City Center. Because their world is downtown, East End, that's about it. The Galleria.
Yes.
Furthest west they've been is the Galleria. And when we talked more and more, I found that it wasn't that necessarily uncommon. We live in these little silos. We live in our little sectors of our city. Many of us feel safe in our little sectors of our city. As Steve Kleinberg says again, one of the fastest growing cities phenomenon is the gated community. Houston has the largest number of gated communities than any major urban city in America. We're going to take a small pause and break. When we come back, we're going to go through the study, council district by council district, looking at comparing and contrasting what is happening and therefore obviously what is not happening in each of the districts. Please stay tuned. I think you'll find it fascinating